Thanks very much. Am I wired? Am I on? Yes, okay, awesome. Well, first of all, thanks very much to Red Hat for reminding everybody about the importance of security today. That was... I got in, it's like, no, it wasn't me. Thanks anyway. So I'm going to skip through the little intro bits, because what I really want to do is get into a bunch of different demos. I'm going to show you about 4 different things. The planets need to align for things to work, so fingers crossed it will go okay. Oh, yeah, you know what? I did this one like 6 months ago. Remember everyone was worried about China? Now everyone's worried about the Americans. So it's just interesting how quickly that gets dated. The Americans probably have the Asia building plans as well. Anyway, my name is Troy Hunt. Many of you may know me, but you can find me on the things that are there on the screen. While I think of it as well, I've queued up a bunch of live tweets. So if my timing and everything is right, much of the stuff I talk about will be tweeted out with the Codemania hashtag, and you can go and have a look at the various links and resources. A lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is in my Pluralsight courses. Come and grab me later on if anybody wants free passes or things like that. But I'm going to give you the first-hand experience anyway, which is kind of a little bit better. So what I want to talk about is hack yourself first. And the idea here is that for us as developers, unless we know how to break our stuff, it's actually very hard for us to protect against it. So think about all the things that you normally see security people talking about, and we'll see many of those today, and consider how many of them you actually know how to break yourself. So the plan is today to learn about a few ways to break your own things, note that emphasis, hopefully before the bad guys do. And once you know how to break it, then it's going to be a whole lot easier to protect it. So here's what we're going to do, a bunch of different things. Finding credit cards, very useful if you need to get a credit card, very, very easy to find. I'll show you how to do that. Break into domain registers. This is Codemania's IP address and Wi-Fi. That's okay, we can do that from here. Ian just left the room. Teaching a 3-year-old to hack into a database. If anyone's got kids, this is a really, really good educational sort of thing. We'll see. Getting free access to Wi-Fi as well, so lounge Wi-Fis. Now with all of these things, I want to show you as many real-world things as I can, up to a kind of boundary that makes it interesting without sort of disclosing too much. Cracking passwords. So a lot of people are storing passwords in ways that they think are very secure, and after this, they're probably going to go back to work on Monday and have a heap of work to do, hopefully. Better you guys do it than somebody else finds it. Grabbing usernames and passwords over SSL. So a lot of people think once I've got SSL, everything is good. I'm going to show you how that's not always the case. And finally, insecure mobile devices and hijacking requests and everything, which will be the really interesting one. Cool. Okay, so where I thought we might start is setting the bar low, because we talk about a lot of sort of very highbrow, complicated security things about cryptography and algorithms and all sorts of interesting stuff. But it's worthwhile remembering where the bulk of the vulnerabilities and the flaws and things are in our software. And they're really, really, really low. You're going to see a bunch from today. But I thought just to warm up, I'll give you a bit of an example here. So here's a bunch of credit cards. Now, where did I get these from? Did I break into a bank, Target? Twitter? Oh man, you guys have seen this. Okay. So there's this thing where and you know what? You can find driver's licenses with addresses and dates of birth and everything on there as well. You can find passports. You can find just about anything. I like this one. Oh my God, I'm so happy. Here's my credit card. So this is kind of the level that we are sometimes dealing with when it comes to security. Now there's also there's a Twitter account called Need a Debit Card. My live tweet should have just pushed that out. Follow Need a Debit Card. They retweet a lot of these things. Then a bunch of other people come on and berate the people for retweeting, and eventually the people that originally posted this learn a lesson kind of the hard way. But better they learn it that way than by somebody else actually pwning their account, which is not quite so nice. So, very, very low bar. But let's move on a little bit with the low bar, and what I thought we might look at is, for the first demo, things that are just dead easy to find on the internet just via Google. So does everyone know what a Google Doc is? So Google Doc is just sort of a carefully constructed Google search for particular keywords or patterns, which turns up things that people probably would rather not have turned up. So let me give you the first example in here. So let's have a look at what we're going to search for here. So, 3 parts to this. In URL FTP. So how many people knew that Google indexes FTP? So if there is open FTP somewhere, Google will index it. We're looking for web.config files, which is Microsoft's configuration file for ASP.NET websites. You can see where this is going, can't you? And just to be sure, we're going to look for file type config just to make sure that it's not a web.config on GitHub or something. Don't put web.configs on GitHub as passwords either. I'll come back to GitHub. There are GitHub people here too, aren't there? Ah, very good. Okay, so what do you think we will find if we just do a little Google search for this? Demo 1. Demo 1. Connected. Oh, my fiddler's in the way too. This is going to get interesting. Okay, so let's try disconnecting, reconnecting, and then if that doesn't work, we're going to go to backups, and we're going to have a lot of backups then. Anyway, whilst this is disconnecting and reconnecting, let us all speculate about what we might find. So, inevitably what happens is we have a lot of FTP-enabled web applications sitting out there on the web, which is fine because that's how we publish code, right? Most of the time. Now, what tends to happen is for convenience or through just not being aware or possibly through stupidity in some cases, people leave their FTP anonymously accessible, so they have no credentials on them whatsoever. And that doesn't look real good, does it? Okay, we're going to wing it. Let's start pulling the backups. Presentations, Codemania, Google Docs. Okay, backup number 1. All right, so here is a Google search for what I just put in the browser. Or the text editor. You have to believe me, this is what happens. Now, the really key bit here, look at the numbers. Okay, we've got about 11,000 results in there. So there's 11,000 odd results for publicly exposed web.config files. Now, what do those web.config files have in them? They have things like connection strings to databases. Many of those databases are sitting on the publicly accessible net. They're not necessarily sitting behind firewalls. The number of databases that connect with the SA account, so that basically the God-right account. So you go in through here and then suddenly there are all these other databases you can access. A lot of things like API keys, all that sort of stuff, often exists there in that web.config world. Now, we'll see if my connection is there, and if it's not, I'll show you an example. Oh man, guys, what's wrong with your Wi-Fi? And it's not me messing up the Wi-Fi either. All right, so let's go to an example of what we can find. So this is one that I pulled. This is the first result you find at the moment. You know what this is? This is a domain registrar. So a domain registrar, the guy who's controlling your domains is on a Malaysian machine. It seems to be a Malay-based registrar. So these guys that manage your domain, possibly manage DNS, they've got the web.configs sitting there, publicly exposed. Now here's the other thing. It's not just web.configs. If there's anonymous FTP enabled to a website, what are all the other things you can get? You can often get other source code that you shouldn't be getting. The number of database backups sitting there is quite interesting. The number of password.txt files sitting there. Also very interesting. If you browse around accidentally, you will find lots of interesting things. So that is about all we can do with no connection on that one. So let's just jump back to here. Okay. So this is good, because I'm going to make this demo a little bit longer since we've got no internet, and this one doesn't need any internet. So what I thought we might do is step it up a little bit of a notch insofar as start to look at some actual hacking techniques, but look at how easy they can be made. So how hard is it really to mount something like a SQL injection attack? So out of interest, who understands SQL injection well enough to attack a website? Just a rough show of hands. I'd say maybe a third, quarter. All right, so we're going to try and get that up to 100%. Now, you will see, you will see. Okay, so let's just do a bit of a SQL injection 101 and look at what exactly this thing is. So here's a pretty typical URL. Okay, now the thing about a URL like this, quite obviously, is that it is made up of 2 parts. It has a resource, domain, path, query string name, and it has the query string value. Very, very simple pattern. Now that often translates through to a database query, which will look something like what you see here. query, parameter. Okay, so far so good. Now here's the thing, and this is what we're now going to get into and exploit in just a moment. Everything you see on the left-hand side of the screen there is trusted. So the URL and the bulk of the query is trusted. And it's trusted insofar as you create this, it runs in your environment. This piece itself can't be modified by an attacker, at least not by going in, say, through a browser. This piece, on the other hand, is a different can of worms. So this is untrusted. So what do I mean by untrusted data? So untrusted data is effectively anything that someone else outside of your control might manipulate. So URLs, a really good example of trusted data. Untrusted data, query string parameters. Form data is untrusted data. Request headers are untrusted data. So for example, if you look at the language or the user agent passed from an HTTP request, all of that is untrusted. Yeah, the browser sends it automatically, but you can reconstruct your own HTTP request and actually attack that, which is kind of nasty. Okay, so this guy, Hacksaw. This is my 3-year-old. I've just realised my wife's in the audience and she knows I've been teaching my 3-year-old to hack. Damn, okay. So what we might do, let's make it really interesting. So my wife is not in IT, so let's teach her how to hack a website. So you want to come up here? Come on, this will be awesome. We've got time, I've got no internet. Okay.
Can I just say, I have no idea that this was going to happen, and
What's your name?
going to pay for it later.
Okay. All right, so let's do this. So what I'm going to do, and because I knew my internet would probably fail, I've got a backup here. So I have a website just here, and this is a website that's part of my course on Hack Yourself First. And this website is full of holes. Anyone can go here now, except for the little local part at the front. You can go to hackyourselffirst.troyhunt.com. There's about 50 different really nasty vulnerabilities. Just give me about 5 minutes before you break anything, if that's okay. So do you want to come and drive? And I'll teach you how to hack. All right. So what you do is, so we've got these blue buttons down here, says view one of these supercars, right? So you click on one of the blue buttons. Okay, so you go there. And it's a local copy, so it should work. So what's going to happen is it's going to load everything with the query string in the URL. So we can see here we've got order by supercar ID. So just copy the URL into the clipboard. Okay, cool. Now we go and open up the Carrot app, which is the one down the bottom. It's called Havage, but it looks like a carrot. Bottom right, there we go, cool. All right, so you will see there is a field there, and I hope people can read it, but there is a bunch of this on my blog, including a video of me teaching the 3-year-old, to hack. So paste that URL over I'm in so much trouble. Paste the URL in over the target. Okay, so we get rid of the one that's in there. Yep, paste that in. And then you click the Analyze button. Just to the right of it. Yep, okay. So this is free software. Anyone can go and grab this right now. It's meant for penetration testers. But if you go onto Google and have a search for Havage and you have a look at the videos, everyone who's providing video guidance on how to use this, their voices haven't broken yet. So they'll give you an idea of who actually uses it. Okay, so down the bottom we can see, hopefully you can see, but I'll read out to you. It says DB name, hack yourself first. Now what this has actually done is it's pulled the database name just by making HTTP requests. So all Kylie's done is she's put that URL in and said analyze, and it's gone away and figured out the name of the database. This is the internal database. So it's doing this using a technique called error-based SQL injection. So it's basically forcing the web application to throw an error. The web application is leaking information about what that error is, and the query has been structured such that it tells you the database name. So that's good. Now let's go and get all the tables in that database. So click on the tables button, which is towards the top. Yep, cool. You click that again. Okay, so we can see our database there. Now just below that there's a Get Tables button, so let's go and get all the tables. Woohoo, there's all our tables. Okay, let's go and get, now for anyone who has internet access, no, you know what, you can go and blow away that site now because it's my local copy. So if you've got internet access, you can go to hackyourselffirst.troyhunt.com and do this exactly. And there are thousands and thousands of sites you can do this on. Okay, let's get the user profiles. So click on the user profile table. Now let's get the columns of that table. You're getting good at this. All right, so...
Like my 3-year-old.
Oh boy. So, click on the... what do we need? We probably want emails and passwords. That'd be good. Let's get the password, let's get the email. Now let's get data. There's a little button up to the top right. Out there. Down there.
Get done. Right.
Woohoo! There we go. Look at that. Well done. You're now a SQL injection hacker. Give Kylie a round of applause. Thank you. So that gives you a sense of just how easy it can be. And the thing to remember is SQL injection is still classified by just about any report you'll read as the #1 risk on the web. And it's partly because there are so many sites that are vulnerable to it, and it's partly because the ease of exploitation, as you have seen, is just dead, dead, dead simple. So, since I've got a bit of time without internet working, how do we protect against SQL injection? So there's a few things. So first of all, one of the things that we really want to do as security is always validate untrusted data against a whitelist of allowable values. So what do we mean by that? Well, in a case, let's go back to the slide, actually, and we'll show you. So the way this sort of attack works is what it's done is it's taken the URL, which we see here, and let's imagine we have that 3, and then we whack a semicolon after it. Now, if that goes down into the database, that semicolon will terminate the SQL statement. And let's imagine after that, we then added whatever we want. So this URL changes to 3, we keep the 3 there, semicolon, drop table product. What's going to happen? If that gets translated through to the database, then your table called product is cactus, it's gone. So whitelist validation says, this is the data that we know to be good. So in a case like this, it's really easy. It should be a positive integer. If we are not passing a positive integer for the ID value, we should be handling this in some sort of graceful fashion and just basically getting the hell out of there. So that's the first thing. The other thing we really want to be doing, and this is sort of the key to SQL injection, is parameterization. So the reason why this falls down is because someone has said, I'm going to have a statement which is just a constant string, select star from product where ID equals, and then I'm just going to append whatever I get given, this untrusted data. Now, by appending it, it all becomes one big statement, and then that goes down to the database and gets executed. Parameterization breaks out the query context from the parameter context. And depending on your language of choice, it works a little bit differently. But once you use parameters and you no longer have the ability to break out of the data context, which is what should just be that 3, and into the query context, the problem sort of goes away, which is good. Okay, so that is SQL injection. And that is that guy. All right, so let's talk about mobile. And mobile's really interesting because there is just so much of it. Has anyone got a sense of how many apps the average person has on their mobile device? Any guesses? Okay. 45. Yeah, you know, 45, 50 is about the number I keep hearing. And how many of those that talk over the internet do you think have pretty serious vulnerabilities? Every time I ask that, people go, all of them, yeah. So look, I mean, the ones that I look at, I reckon probably a good half of them have some pretty serious vulnerabilities. And I wanted to talk to you about some of the examples, specific examples I've seen of what these vulnerabilities are and just how nasty they can be. So I'll give you 3 examples. So here's a good one. So there was a mobile app I was looking at recently connecting to an API backend. Now what I'm going to show you later on, and it will be interesting with no internet, but it's very easy to proxy the traffic from your mobile devices through your machine and look at all the HTTP requests. So what that means is every time the mobile device, or any app on the mobile device, makes a request to a resource like an API, you get to see it in Fiddler. We'll look at Fiddler in just a second. So what I did with this case is I proxied the traffic through Fiddler, and I used the app like it's meant to be used, and I saw a request to an API, which is fine. Put the API into the browser and discovered there was a WSDL, a Web Services Definition Language, which listed all the other methods. One of those methods was get users. You guess what it did? Yeah, got users. And to make it really, really convenient, it got all the passwords as well. It returned all the usernames and all the passwords. Now, the really funny thing is I said to the guy, you know, all I did is proxy this through Fiddler, and 2 minutes later I got this. And he said, yeah, but our users don't use Fiddler. Oh, man. It's a true story, and it happens, and I think a lot of the time, maybe there's just a bit of innocence. But this is sort of the whole idea of hacking yourself first, right? Like, figure out how to break this stuff, and you'll start to think in ways like other people do. So here's another good one. So this was a bank. I won't say which 3-letter acronym across Australia and New Zealand it was, but anyway, it was a bank, and In fact, what I wanted to do was I wanted to use this bank as an example in my Tech Ed talk last year of doing SSL right. Because I'd looked at it before and it was awesome, behaved beautifully. So I proxied it through Fiddler, and I found that basically the way they were using their SSL was entirely useless. So what was actually happening is when the mobile app made the request over HTTPS, it never validated the certificate. So the whole idea of this sort of certificate authority-based SSL mechanism is that you've got to make sure the certificate is actually trusted. Now you might think, well, do I actually ever write that? And you probably don't, because most of the mechanisms out there for making HTTP requests do that implicitly. If you go into most modern frameworks and you go, make an HTTPS request, that will validate the cert, and if the cert is not valid, it'll throw up its hands. You have to turn that off in order to break it. And inevitably, that's what this bank did. And afterwards, they fixed it very quietly and very quickly. But it's the sort of thing where I can imagine they went, man, I'm trying to develop on this thing and I don't have a cert. I'll just turn this off. Easy peasy, here we go. And somewhere there was a quality control missing before they released it to actually make sure that it worked. So here's another one. This is on my blog. This was about Westfield Shopping Centre, so I can name it. So Westfield Shopping Centre in Australia had a system where, you know when you go into a car park and they have the boards and it tells you how many spots are free, and then you look at each park and they've got little lights on top so you can see the green ones and you go and park there. So this one also had cameras, and the cameras would do optical recognition of the number plates. So when you walk into the car park, or drive into the car park, leave your car and you go into the shops, and 2 hours later you come back, you've got no idea where your car is. You pull out the mobile app, you put in your number plate, and it's done the OCR on the number plate so that it can show you these 4 sort of little grainy images, and you can figure out whether you're the black SUV or the red sports car or whatever. But it makes sure it doesn't disclose the number plate. Now this actually disclosed 2 really interesting things. So one thing it disclosed is the API returning the responses actually returned all the number plates. So it had the raw plain text in the JSON response body. So it was leaking information. The app didn't need it, but it was sending it back anyway. So this is another thing we see a lot of, excessive info coming back. The other problem is that if you took off the URL that it was hitting, if you took off the path from the URL that it was hitting, the IP address that it was on, and it was actually just on an IP address, so they'd created a dependency where the app on everybody's phones needed that IP address, which is kind of weird as well. But anyway, you took that off and suddenly you had the admin system for the entire shopping centre, the control systems, just publicly facing. And I did work with those developers for a little bit, and they said, well, it meant that we could reuse it. That's great, it meant that I could use it too, mate, so that's a bit of a problem. And you know, this is the thing, it's just so easy to find, but I have a theory where I think a lot of the problem is when you're building web applications and you're in the browser, it's very easy to manipulate URLs and right-click and view source and get a good idea of what's happening and sort of going across the metal. It's harder once it's an API behind a mobile app, particularly when you might have different teams building the API and the app. Okay, so let me give you another example. This is an internet-dependent example that I have offline backups for, so we'll see how this works out. So what I want to show you is how to proxy your traffic through Fiddler. And out of interest, who used Fiddler? Oh wow, lots of people. And who actually has tried proxying mobile traffic? We've got much of a... All right, so that's a pretty small number. That's, yeah, probably 5% of the audience. So this is dead easy. It depends on your device, but on an iPhone, all you do is you go into your connection and you go down to the bottom where it says HTTP proxy, you set it to manual, you set the IP address of your PC, and you set port 8888. And we'll have a look at the Fiddler side of things in just a moment. Now what I'm going to do, and this will be interesting with the connection, is I'm going to open up the British Airways app. And one of the things about the British Airways app is it has this executive club, and you can sign into the executive club and you can get executive-y sort of things like Wi-Fi. So the only way you can get the Wi-Fi password, I'm not an executive club member, clearly. I tried to get the Wi-Fi and it said, no, sorry, you can't come in, you've got to be silver or gold executive club. So I thought, well, bugger this. Let's have a look. So, what you do, so here's Fiddler, and it's got a bunch of requests and other stuff there. I still have no connection, so this is going to look kind of interesting. But let me show you how to set it up and what you should be seeing as a response. So all you do is you go into Tools, Fiddler Options, and you go into Connections. And your connections look kind of like this. So all you have to do is make sure Allow Remote Computers to Connect is ticked. Port defaults to 8888 anyway. And then so long as your device is configured, you should see the request. Now, I'm going to pull my iPhone out. We may see the request. We probably won't see the response, so I will pull up a pre-saved response. But here's what happens. So let me go and find British Airways. Now, as soon as I run this, if I've still got... Oh, no. Okay, yeah. See this? Nothing on there. Because this is connected to the Wi-Fi, but my bloody laptop's not connected anymore. So I'm going to pull up a saved fiddler trace, and you'll see exactly what this should look like under normal conditions. And so if we go down to here, British Airways. So this is what a fiddler trace looks like. So this is the response that happens when you start the British Airways app. Now what we've actually got up here is we've got 3 requests and inevitably 3 responses. So this is the sort of thing that you see your devices doing when you open up an app. Now what we can do is we can look at something like Lounge, and what we will find here is that we have 2 parts in Fiddler. So the top part of the right-hand side is the request. So this is all the request headers and things like accept headers and cookies and all that kind of stuff. And then down the bottom is the response. And if we go and look at the raw response here, we will find that as soon as you start the app up, it pulls back all the passwords. Good passwords too, aren't they? Now I chose this as an example because I don't think it's probably too dire if people see what British Airways lounge passwords in other countries are. But there are a lot of apps that do this with serious data. The Westfield one that I spoke about just before is a pretty good example of that. So the problem here is that the access controls are being built into the client, and there is no concept of those access controls existing behind the client on the server. So really what they need to be doing is authenticating people and then authenticating to a service, and not just going, hey, here's all the data, and then we will trust the device to figure out who gets to see this and who doesn't. Other interesting things you can do with Fiddler, have a look at the sort of data that a lot of apps send backwards and forwards. So I got an example of, I was looking at the Foxtel app, and you open up the Foxtel app and it's got, electronic program guides and all that sort of thing. And it's got these tiny, tiny, tiny little icons of the channel next to each channel, about 50 by 50 pixel icons. They look like 50 by 50 pixel icons, but they're all 2 megabytes. Okay, so what it's doing is it's just pulling down these massive files. I think one of my live tweets has a link to the article I wrote about that. And one of the developers chimed in and gave a little bit of background on why that was the case. And it was because that's the way they gave the files to him. And it's not to berate the guy, but it's the sort of stuff that you only discover once you get in and you proxy this data. So you find very, very interesting things, not just about security. Okay, so that was on Fiddler and mobile. Okay, so let's move on to something more serious. So let's talk about passwords and password storage. If someone has a better idea for an image for hashing of passwords, let me know. All right, so who's familiar with the concept of hashing a password? Okay, so most people, but as a quick sort of password hashing 101, the theory is that it's not good to store passwords in plain text, because if your database gets owned by someone like my wife using Havage, she will get all of the passwords straight away, and there is no cryptographic protection whatsoever. So that's a problem. So the idea of a hash is a deterministic one-way algorithm. So what that means is if you have a piece of plain text, you put it into a hashing algorithm like MD5, for example. You will get a cipher out of the other end, so something that looks like gobbledygook, and you store that in the database. Now it's deterministic because whenever you repeat that process, you always get the same cipher. So if I create an MD5 hash of a password called, say, password with an @ so that you can't actually figure out that it's really, don't do that. I will get the same result as if anyone else in this room goes to their machine and MD5's the same string. So what it means is, the way it works, when someone logs on, they provide their password, the password is hashed, and that cipher is compared to the one that's stored in the database. And if they match, you log on. Now the problem with that is because it is deterministic, you can pre-compute a lot of these hashes. So you can do something like take a password dictionary. And a password dictionary is not like an Oxford or Cambridge or something. It is a whole bunch of words that are typically used as passwords. We have good password dictionaries because there have been so many breaches of systems that have stored everything in plain text. And I'm going to show you one later on. So you can take a password dictionary, you can pre-compute all the MD5 hashes for those passwords and build them into what's referred to as a rainbow table. So it's like a little key value pair of hash and plain text. You go and breach a database, and because it is a deterministic one-way algorithm, every single password that is in your dictionary will match up to a hash, and things get cracked. So that's bad. So what we decided to do is salt the passwords. Now what we want to do with salt is randomness. So what generally happens with a salt is you might have, say, 32 random bytes, and we won't get into the semantics of what makes it random or not, but let's just imagine it's 32 randomized bytes. That will get added to the password, and then they'll get hashed, and then in the database you store the salt and you store the hashed output of the salt plus the password. Looks kind of like this. Now the reason why this works is because what you're storing in the database is these two pieces, the salt and the cipher. So the one piece missing from the equation is the password. So when someone logs in and they give you the password, you can take the username that they provided, go to their record, pull back the salt, add it to the password, hash it, and now you've got the cipher. So what ends up happening is you get a database that looks like this, salts and hashes. Many, many, many systems run like this, straight out of the box, run like this. So is this secure, salted hash? Everyone's saying no because they know the meant to say no. There are a huge number of systems out there that are doing just this, salted hashes. So let's have a look at how to break this one. So what we're going to do, the problem we have with all this is that if you can compute hashes fast enough, you can break this. So what I've got here is I have got a password dictionary, which has got a whole heap of passwords in it, and we'll look at how many there are in just a second. And I've got a piece of software called Hashcat. Hashcat is free software you can grab off the net. And what we're going to run here, if we have a look at this query, is it's going to run Hashcat. It's passing in, you can see there's an M parameter, 2611. 2611 is the pattern for vBulletin version 4 or earlier password hashes. The reason I'm using this is that last weekend Proxy got hacked. Everyone know what Proxy is? Home theatre PCs. It's now owned by Samsung. They got hacked and about 160,000 passwords got leaked online. So I went and grabbed these and have a look at them and went, oh wow, they're all vBulletin. They're all this sort of basic MD5 with a salt. So what I did is I grabbed these passwords, and you can see I've got Proxy passwords.text in a parameter. We've also got that 2611, which is the salted hash pattern that vBulletin uses. And that is not Ashkiller, that's actually Hashkiller, there's an H on the other end. But I've got a dictionary, a password dictionary called Hashkiller. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to run this guy, and I'll show you what happens. Now what we've got to remember is that this is just a little laptop with a tiny little GPU. And I'll come back to GPUs in a second. But the important bit is that this is our password dictionary. So that is 23 and a bit million passwords, okay? So again, things like wacky character combinations, character substitutions. Now what's happening is Hashcat is going through and it's taking those passwords from the dictionary and it's trying them with the salts from the breached Proxy accounts. And what you can actually see here now is that it's starting to disclose all the passwords. So here is the cipher, here is the salt, they use only a very, very small salt, and here's the plain text password. And you know their passwords because they've got things like A, B, C, D. So it is just going through and just computing as many of these in a row as it possibly can. Now this is not sort of NSA stuff, this is stuff that you can do at home on your own PC, which is what kind of makes it a little bit scary, if I'm honest. So what happens, this is now done, I've only done a subset of passwords, but here's the interesting thing. So this is the speed, right? This tiny little laptop has done 766 kilohashes per second. So 750,000 hashes per second. Does that sound fast? Yeah, it's not. It's not real good. Hashcat on modern GPU hardware running a PC for MD5 can do about 4 billion hashes per second. Now, if you've got one consumer level graphics card and you can create 4 billion hashes per second, and you can chain them up, right? You can run them in parallel. So there are guys who have 10, 20, and this is consumer guys, not NSA guys, that can just pre-compute, or rather compute one by one, all of these hashes and basically crack through them. So that is why your simple salted hashed passwords are effectively useless. The only thing that saves it is if people use strong passwords that aren't in dictionaries or aren't likely to be in pre-computed arrangements of characters. But people don't do that, not generally. So salted hash passwords, yeah, go and change your password mechanism. The fix, by the way, is to use something that is more computationally not computationally advanced, but basically makes it harder, makes it slower. So there are algorithms like bcrypt or script, or there are things like PBKDF2, which can increase the enumeration, or the iterations rather, of the hashes. So you actually want to make it slow. The slower you make it, suddenly you're not doing 4 billion hashes per second, now you're only doing 40 million or something. It's still a lot, but it's only 1% of the speed.
What about using an external hash, an external salt as well?
Yeah, so... Yep, so long as that doesn't get compromised as well. Because that's often the problem. People say, okay, well, why don't I have a salt and I can have it in the database, and then I might have a salt somewhere else. At the end of the day, you've got to have bits that are accessible when people log on in order to be able to do the hashing. And the question then is, can you mitigate your risk a little bit by putting some of those bits, like a hash key or something, in another environment, so that if it's just SQL injection and your database gets owned, then they don't actually have the key that's also using the hash that's somewhere else. So it can help. It's a mitigation. It's something that probably has to happen in combination with stronger hashing, because you still want to make sure that even if everything's exposed, and there's this theory, there's this guy called Kekhoff, who has Kekhoff's principle, and he says basically your cryptographic algorithms should be built such that if an attacker knew everything other than the key, and we don't normally have a key in hashing algorithms, we'd have it in symmetric or asymmetric encryption, but if a hacker knows all of that, they shouldn't be able to break your cryptography system. So it can help, but it's not an entire panacea. Okay. Wi-Fi's, transport layers. And this needs an internet connection. All right, we'll explain it anyway. So I mentioned before about the bank, who we don't mention, and the bank wasn't validating the certificates. And this is, this is a real serious problem, because when you don't validate a certificate, effectively you become vulnerable to a man in the middle injecting their own certificate. So it was great for the developers because they didn't need to get a certificate. Great for the attacker too, because what the attacker can do is he can sit in the middle, he can wait for a request to be made, he'll make the request, he'll get the response, and then he'll sign it again with his own certificate and send it on. Now, he's not a certificate authority unless he's Pwn DigiNotar or one of those ones who got into trouble. But it won't validate, right? The browser or the client will load the certificate and they'll say, hey, you're requesting troyhunt.com, but your certificate is for evilattacker.com. So I'll give you an example, and this may work, we'll see. Oh no, because this isn't on the internet at all. All right, so I'll show you what I was going to do, and there are links that should be live tweeted that actually show you how to do this anyway. So what you can do in Fiddler is you go into your Fiddler options, you go into your HTTPS, and you can capture HTTPS connects and you can decrypt HTTPS traffic. Now this isn't some sort of NSA decryption, this is simply Fiddler saying I am going to substitute my own certificate when you make this request. So you're making a request that goes through Fiddler, it has control over the negotiation. So what normally happens is I pull my phone out and I open up, in this case, the Farmers Direct website, Farmers Direct mobile app. So this is a mobile app we have in Australia. They had flaws all over the place. So they had lots of things. In fact, Kylie told me this. Signed up and said, are they meant to email you your password when you sign up? No. So I sent them an email and said, oh, you're emailing your password, you have no HTTP only cookies, you're missing encryption here, there and everywhere. And they came back and said, yeah, but 90% of websites do it. So I take that as meaning that they're happy for me to talk about it. So what happens when you try and log on via the mobile app, and I think it's got a padlock, I love these ones. You go on a mobile app or a website and it's got a padlock, a GIF or a bitmap of a padlock. This is secure, trust me. It's a freaking bitmap. It's not secure. Anyway, they had a bitmap. But what was actually happening is when they make the request, and we can see here, and where were we? I think this is logging on. If we go and we have a look at the web forms, what we could see is we had the credentials, right? Username, password. Now, Fiddler is a good representation of what a man in the middle can see on an unencrypted Wi-Fi network. So it's not that hackers use Fiddler in order to attack people, it's just that this is a great way of showing if your traffic is going through this proxy, this is the sort of stuff that an attacker could see. It's the same sort of stuff that anyone running a rogue wireless network, if anyone would do that, could see for your traffic. It's the same stuff your ISP can see. It's the same stuff the guys running this convention centre can see when you're using their network. So it's a good representation of that. So what was actually happening is the device was never actually loading and validating the correct certificate. Fiddler was going, here's the certificate, and the device was going, hey, it says HTTPS in the address bar, awesome, let's go. So what should happen, and you'll see this with good apps, so I was going to say banks, most banks, if you try and proxy your traffic through Fiddler and you set it up like this, you will actually see the app have an absolute hissy fit and say untrusted connection or can't validate certificate, and it will bail out. It won't send your credentials over the network looking like this. Okay. All right, last bit. So, Wi-Fi. Who's been using the free Wi-Fi today? Come on. Who's been using the free NSA Wi-Fi? Now don't lie, because I know your device names. You have been. Okay, so what I want to talk about with Wi-Fi, and just as a note, this little thing here, which was running before, is unplugged because I kept hijacking my own traffic and I couldn't get an internet connection. And ironically, I still can't get an internet connection. But what this is called a Wi-Fi Pineapple. And you can buy this off the net for about $100 for penetration testers again. And what it does is it's got a few little party tricks, right? So it's got a little battery pack, lasts for about a day. And it does two main things with regards to Wi-Fi traffic. So one is it can act as a wireless access point. So I stood this up and I called it free NSA Wi-Fi, and a bunch of people saw it and went, woohoo, free Wi-Fi, and they jumped on it. True story. I've got your MAC addresses. So there's that. Now, if you went to a very public place, like an airport, cafe, and you called it free airport Wi-Fi, free cafe Wi-Fi, whatever it may be, you would get a lot of people connecting to it. So you then have their traffic going into one of the NICs on here, and you could then send it out to the other one through the legitimate connection. So it's actually got two little network adapters, and it's also got an RJ45 so that you could just go out via Ethernet. So you can basically run their traffic through it. You can use tools like TCP dump, and actually save all those packets. And all of that is quite nasty. You can manipulate the data. So what we've got to remember with SSL is it's not just about encryption. There's three main things. So you get assurance. So are you connecting to who you think you're connecting to? You get integrity. So has my data been changed? So a good example of where integrity goes wrong with SSL is if you load a login form and you load that login form over HTTP, how do you know the login form hasn't been manipulated? It doesn't matter that it posts to HTTPS because someone's already put a keylogger in your page by then. And if it sounds weird, I think one of my auto tweets was Tunisian government did this a few years ago. So all of their citizens were connecting through government-controlled ISPs, and they were just going, okay, well, look, every time you load facebook.com, and at the time they used to load our HTTP, we're going to put in our keylogger. And they just siphoned off thousands and thousands of credentials that way. So integrity, and obviously the third one, confidentiality. And this is the one we most frequently associate with HTTPS. We expect our traffic not to be able to be observed. So that was the first part of it. So there are two things. That's the rogue access point. The other thing it can do is it's got this little feature called Karma. Now, a lot of people don't know this about your devices, but when you connect to a network, and you know you've got that little button, or does it automatically, which says, automatically connect me next time I come back to here, which is really convenient because you come home and, you know, per the slide here, you automatically connect, which is awesome. What you might not know is that your device is constantly sending out what they call probe requests, saying, where is my home network? So I'm here and it's going, where's my network in Sydney? I've just been overseas. Where are the networks I've connected to overseas? And anyone with one of these can see those probe requests. So the first thing is, it discloses a lot of information about where you've been. The scary bit though, is that when it sees that probe request, it can then say, I am the network you're looking for. Woo-hoo. You're looking for Troy's home network. I am Troy's home network. If that network was like the one that 5 or so people only have been connecting to here, where it has no encryption, so no WPA, not even any WEP, then it will connect automatically. So you don't take your phone out of your pocket and you're connected through. So that's pretty scary. And just to give you an idea of the sort of data it's seen, today, your data. So this is a little, it runs a little OpenWRT embedded Linux, okay? It's got its own little web server. It's very user-friendly. So you get in there and you configure this thing. And what it does then is it creates a log. And I can't show you all of this log because it's absolutely freaking huge. But what we should be seeing there, and I'll zoom that guy in a little bit on some of the culprits. These are people's devices that have connected to here. They may not have known it. Now, if you're connected, I was running what they call DNS spoof. So you make a request for any website and it comes back and says, hey, look, this is not where you want to be. You think you're somewhere else. So it was not doing anything nasty. But that could just as easily have been routed through and you never even took your phone out of your pocket. And I can say, oh man, I wonder if this is why I'm having problems. So from a web development perspective, the big lesson here is that HTTPS is really critical. When we don't have HTTPS, there are so many different ways of hijacking networks, even without one of these. If you've got a networker card that can go into monitor mode and it can look at other data on the same network, on an open network, and this is an open network, if you go to Stack Overflow, your Stack Overflow authentication cookie is being sent with every request. Anyone here could potentially grab that cookie and then be you and then go and vote up SharePoint answers or something stupid like that. So look, with that, guys, I think I am pretty much out of time. If anyone wants to see the data that came out of here later on, then come and grab me. And I'm always happy to show people the pineapples. So thank you very much, everyone. Do we have time for any questions? A couple of minutes?
How would you authenticate a web application on mobile? So if you want to see your password there.
Very, very carefully. So, okay, the question was, how do you authenticate a web app to a web app via mobile? So, like, how do you authenticate to an API backend? I mean, there's a number of things. So obviously one of them is the transport layer. You need to be authenticating over HTTPS. To be honest, one of the easiest ways these days is to use an OAuth provider. Authenticate to an OAuth provider, make the credential storage somebody else's problem. To be honest, most of the ways have varying degrees of things that are confusing. I don't think there's a really nice, easy, simple, compelling story, short of third-party providers. Anyone else?
Do you recommend validating the CA certificate manually in the app rather than trusting the operating system to do it for you?
So should you validate the CA certificate manually? Look, I think really what's built into the OS, in theory, should do a good enough job. I'm not aware of attacks against the validation of, because that would effectively be saying, has, for example, Windows got a flaw that's no longer validating against its list of trusted CAs. What some people do, just to go one step further than that though, is they will do certificate pinning. So what we would mean by certificate pinning is they'll look at the thumbprint of the certificate and they will say, this client expects to see this thumbprint on the certificate. So even if someone goes and pwns a certificate authority and manages to generate a valid certificate, it won't pass because the client, over and above what the OS is doing, is saying, I will only accept this exact certificate. So that'd be probably the most sensible step.
Causes you some issues when your certificate expires, right?
Yeah, so if your certificate expires and your thumbprint changes, you're going to have some problems. It's then a question of how you might trust multiple thumbprints. So you might generate the new certificate, update the apps, push the... And you know, I mean, you're not going to do this for everyday apps, but if you're a bank, I think that'd be a good thing. And you might have a sort of a 2-month grace period where if you don't update your app within this 2 months, then the old certificate's going to go and the old apps won't have the thumbprint of the new certificate. So there's a way of mitigating the risk, but I wouldn't do it with everything.
Do you have any thoughts on like a wider SaaS ecosystem in terms of the original app might be really, really secure, but then you've got API access to third-party partners and
Yeah.
your app?
Yeah, that's a good question. So thoughts on what we'd probably call the ability to pivot through networks. So it might be a relatively secure environment, but there's one vulnerability which then leads you to something else and something. Did I get that right?
Where you've got third-party integrators integrating with a central SaaS app and it's getting data off there, and you know, they might have their own apps and their own mobile apps, and so the original SaaS application has really lost control of the security of the data.
Right, so you've got an increasing number of third parties who are integrating into your environment, and then you basically inherit their security profile to a degree. I think that's one of the problems, and it's partly through things like SaaS environments, it's partly through mashups where we have lots of different services tied together. It's also partly through the fact that most projects these days have got so many external components. So one of the things I talk a lot about is the OWASP Top 10, the Open Web Application Security Project. And they have a dedicated section there where they talk about using components with known vulnerabilities. For a lot of projects these days, when you kick it off, and I'm from a predominantly Microsoft perspective, you've got so many external libraries in there, really, really good libraries, but you're dependent on the security profile of all of those. So it makes it tricky. There's not an easy answer, and many companies will do things like say, look, we're not going to use third-party products or services or providers unless we go through and security audit them. Over there?
Of the things you showed us just now, which ones were technically illegal?
None of them? Yeah, so the statement there was that was an awesome demo, thank you very much. That's good. Anybody else? You do it via conference Wi-Fi. Okay, so if you want to test apps and things, how do you do it without the police knocking your door? Look, I think that there are a couple of angles to it. One of the things is it's very dependent on the environment you're in terms of different countries have different legislature about what you can and can't do. For me, it's probably two parts. One is just common sense. So often I've seen people get into trouble because they find something like a direct object reference vulnerability. So, you know, they change a number in the URL and they see someone else's bank account. And then just to make sure it works, they test that 2,000 times. And then the police come and knock on their door. So, you know, use your brain. I think if you see something like that, you can either walk away from it or disclose it responsibly. But for the sort of stuff I showed you today, this is one of the reasons I built that website, that Hack Yourself First website. That's there to go and do this. You can go nuts, you can run Havage and whatever you like on it without any problems. But other than that, just stand up some apps internally, put it on your local machine. You can almost replicate a normal sort of environment internally. Okay, thanks very much, guys.